Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, October 15th, 2009. I'm James Spencer. Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about home brewing. With this week, an interview with Alex Ganum of Upright Brewing Company in Portland. Alex uses open fermentation, sour mashing, and other interesting techniques in his small brewery to bring local flavor to the Portland area. If you're new to home brewing and would like to get into the hobby for the first time, check out our website, basicbrewing.com, where you can find archives of our audio and video podcasts and our DVDs to walk you through basic and more advanced brewing techniques. And you can follow me on Twitter, my username, Basic Brewing, all one word. Also, you can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/basicbrewing.james. And we have a Basic Brewing Radio and Basic Brewing video page on Facebook, which is now easier to find than in the beginning. You can find it at facebook.com/basicbrewing. And fans of the show on that page will get occasional notices when shows like this are posted. Thanks again to everybody clicking on a Amazon.com associate link on our basicbrewing.com site. Whenever you think of Amazon, think of us and click on our associate link first. It won't cost you any extra, and you'll be helping us to bring you the show, and we appreciate your support. And we also have associate links for Brew Your Own Magazine and the American Homebrewers Association on our site, too. Well, I'm going to start off with some sad news this week. Greg Noonan, noted beer author and brewer, founder of Vermont Pub and Brewery, passed away earlier this week. I learned about his passing through Twitter. Rick from Somerville, Massachusetts, let me know, and thanks to Rick for doing that. I'd been sort of unplugged from the computer for a while, and I didn't see earlier tweets and notices that had been posted. Rick posted me because he knew that Greg Noonan has appeared on this podcast. Way back in 2006, I emailed Charlie Papazian asking him if he'd be interested in doing an interview on water and brewing. And Charlie basically said that Greg would be a better man to talk to, and so I did. I contacted Greg. He agreed to do the show. And I have to admit that I was intimidated going into the interview because I'd received Greg's book, New Brewing Lager Beer, as a prize in a brewing contest a few years before, and I'd been impressed with the highly technical nature of the book. I mean, the chapter on water alone was 40 pages. So I studied up on the topic, thinking I better be on my best game to talk nuts and bolts about water with Greg Noonan in the interview. But when I actually talked to Greg, I was relieved to find out that he had a very relaxed and easygoing nature, and he made the topic actually fun and easy to understand. And I listened to our conversation again yesterday, and you can find it on in our archives, Basic Brewing Radio, June 15th, 2006. And I recommend that you listen to that. My favorite quote in the interview is when Greg said, "Don't get your shorts in a knot unless you have a problem." And I guess that goes along the lines of relax, don't worry, have a homebrew, right? If you don't have a problem, don't worry about it. And that really put my mind at ease because up until that point, I hadn't played with my water, didn't know much about water, and was really intimidated about the whole subject. But I was happy with my beer, so I kind of felt guilty that I hadn't been playing with my water, but Greg said, "Don't get your shorts in a knot unless you have a problem." And that really made me feel better. I traded emails back and forth with Greg a couple of times, but other than that, you can pretty much hear our entire relationship on that recording, in that interview. But even so, hearing that Greg had passed away brought me down quite a bit yesterday, I have to admit. My condolences go out to Greg's family and friends, those who actually knew him, and I hope that you'll have another listen to our conversation about water. And when you do, raise a glass of homebrew to Greg Noonan, because your brew is probably better because of his work. On to happier things. In our conversation last time on Solera Brewing, Michael Tonsmeyer had a correction, and I forgot to mention it last week when I produced the show. Mike says, I think I screwed up my math on the average age of a Solera. I said pulling 1/3 a year gives you an average of 2-year-old beer, 1/4 a year, 3-year-old beer, etc. It's actually the age of the beer. It's actually the age of the beer will be after you top it off with fresh beer. The age of the blend pulled from the Solera is just the inverse of the fraction taken. 2 years for 1/2, 3 years for 1/3, etc. So there you go. That makes sense. My apologies to Mike for forgetting that last week. And also last week, if you'll remember, I went on a rant about not sharing too much good beer with people who don't appreciate it. That's a paraphrase, but that's the gist of it. And, my attitude is basically let them sip a little bit, but only give them a full pint if they ask for it. And I got some very thoughtful replies, and I'll paraphrase some of them here. Adam from Davenport, Iowa says, I realize that one's choice in beer isn't all that different from their choice in religion or politics. They may have a very personal reason for drinking only Bud, Miller, Coors. Maybe that's the beer that they always shared with their now-deceased grandfather, or maybe it's the beer they grew up on. Whatever the reason, they're not wrong for liking that particular beer, no matter how terrible it tastes. It just means that they haven't become enlightened yet. The worst thing you can do is put down or insult their choice in beer, because when you do that, you're really just insulting them personally. That's a good point. With that being said, I'm still very evangelical. An approach that works for me is that if I'm out for dinner with friends or family, I offer to buy them a drink, one that I get to choose. I let them know that if they don't like it, then they can. I let them know that if they don't like it, they don't have to drink it. No pressure, because they're not out any money, and I'll gladly finish what they can't. I've successfully converted quite a few people this way. Aaron from Star Tannery, Virginia writes, one of the most effective methods I've used to convert my friends to the wonders of the craft beer world is to invite them to my isolated home with few other choices besides what I want them to have. I usually obtain a keg of something like Sierra Nevada Pale Ale or Sam Adams Oktoberfest. I try not to get anything too strongly flavored in order to soften their palate gradually. After this treatment for a year or two, I find them quite unafraid to try more specialized styles. Much like strong Belgian styles that need time to achieve their full flower, inexperienced palates need to be nurtured to reach their full potential, a task well suited to the home brewer. If you are patient with your beer, you can be patient with your friends. Well put. Nate from Denver has this. I agree with you about giving the uneducated a sample size of the good beer. I keep the GABF sample glasses, Great American Beer Festival sample glasses, and serve my homebrew out in those first. That's a great idea. However, before we go turning our noses up at the big three, I'd like to challenge a few more homebrewers to make an American lager or American Pilsner. It's not as easy as it sounds. My recipe calls for a cereal mash followed by a triple decoction mash. Then there's the handling of the lager yeast. There's nothing wrong with a clean lager profile, Nate says. Simple enough to have nothing to hide behind and just complex enough to please a trained palate. As a lager brewer, it's a little disappointing to see stouts, IPAs, and barley wines win best of show time after time. Not that there's anything wrong with any of those styles. It would be nice to see a lager shine through every now and then. Are we all really that bad at brewing lagers? Nate asks. In the end, instead of turning our noses up at these styles, let's take them back from the big boys. My Pilsner is far superior to Miller's. How's yours? Well, Nate, I have made a Pilsner, and it was pretty good, I have to say. And I agree, it's not the Pilsner style itself that's lacking. It's the interpretation of some of these beers, these brewers, big brewers. So that's a good challenge. Brew up a good Pilsner to bring your friends around. And use Greg Noonan's book, New Brewing Lager Beer, as a guide. You can't go wrong with that. So thanks, everybody who wrote in on that topic. And I'm glad to see that, when I get up on the soapbox, it inspires some people. Doesn't turn everybody off. That's good. Now we have one last audio interview from our trip to Portland, Oregon, and I hope to have a video episode on the topic posted by the end of the week. Our buddy Charles Culp, formerly of Austin, Texas, now lives in Portland, and he was the one who suggested that we swing by Upright Brewing and talk to Alex Ganum. Good choice, Charles. Upright is a small brewery in the basement of a recently renovated building, basically a brewery and a tap room in the same space, and two guys making some awesome beer. Well, Alex Ganum, welcome to Basic Brewing Radio.
Hey, welcome.
And thanks for having us here in your cool basement brewery. This is really a nice place.
Oh, thank you.
And Charles Culp is our the reason that we're here. Welcome, Charles.
Hi, James.
And you were on a previous episode of Basic Brewing Radio back. Did you help us with the tasting back at the homebrew store with the hot side aeration experiment?
Yeah, that was it.
So you're a returning guest here, and then a recurring guest, Andy Sparks, is here as well.
Oh, I always love to be on the show, especially when we go to great breweries like this.
Yeah. Here we are with beers in our hand before lunch, so it can't be too bad. But we are here at Upright Brewing Company, and this is a brand new brewery. Tell us about your operation.
Well, we started here as a production brewery in March, and we're specializing in French and Belgian-inspired farmhouse ales, but we like to say with a Pacific Northwest twist.
And what's that twist?
Twist is using mostly local ingredients and brewing our own recipes. If we make a saison, we might call it a Northwest saison. If we make wheat beer, we might call it, table beer. I mean, we like to kind of just mix it up and definitely do our own things.
And talk about your background a bit.
Well, I first got into brewing probably about a month after moving to Portland, if you can believe that. I moved here about 7 years ago, made friends with a lot of home brewers because seemingly everyone's a home brewer here, and really fell in love with it. I thought it was a whole lot of fun. So, a short while later, kind of decided I wanted to pursue it a little bit more. So I got an internship at Brewery Omegang in 2003, and then I really realized I wanted to stick with it. So I moved back to Portland and got a gig at BJ's Brewing Company here in town. I worked with Dan Peterson for a while there. He was a really talented brewer. I learned quite a bit from him. And ended up leaving in the tail end of 2006 and planning this, and here we are.
So it can't be that simple, though. I mean, starting a brewery is a lot of homebrewers' dreams, but talk about your road to actually opening a brewery.
Well, I feel like, gosh, it's kind of a tough one. I mean, you definitely learn a lot in different ways. I mean, you definitely learn a lot through experience. I'd say anybody who wants to open up a brewery should definitely work as much as they can in as many breweries as they can, and preferably in really busy breweries. I mean, I remember at BJ's, we were running that brewery at capacity or practically over capacity the whole time I was there. And you learn a lot that way, I think. You're sort of forced into a lot of things and challenged in a lot of ways. And so you can learn a lot in a pretty short amount of time. And then the other end of that, too, is sort of the more academic end of things. I mean, I never went to school for any fermentation science or anything like that. But I picked up a lot of the textbooks that you would use in a lot of those classes and programs. And there's a lot to be learned from that, too. Even in a small brewery like this, I mean, a lot of those programs, I think, can be probably geared more towards like larger breweries and setups and that sort of thing, but it can still gather a lot. I mean, it's good to know the process as well as you can, without a doubt. So there's definitely two ends to that.
Was it a shock going from a big operation to literally a two-man operation?
Yeah, I mean, this is like the smallest brewery I've worked in now, and it's kind of nice scaling back for sure. I mean, in a lot of ways, the bigger breweries are pretty amazing, obviously, for all sorts of reasons. Just the equipment is pretty amazing, and like the whole process can be just pretty awesome when you're cranking out a lot of beer. But to bring it back down to a smaller scale is really nice. I mean, it feels almost like big batches of homebrew in a lot of ways. So it's really hands-on, which is really nice on a day-in and day-out basis.
And you've got a killer homebrew system. Talk about your system.
Let's see. We have a 10-barrel batch size here. It's a really simple brew house. We do infusion mashes. It's a direct fire kettle. We use mostly Great Western malts that are made right here in Vancouver, Washington, very close by. We use all whole leaf hops from Mount Angel. And the beers are mostly fermented in 20-barrel open-top fermenters. If we do want to use an alternate yeast strain for any special beers, we do that in a 10-barrel unitank because we want to keep our house yeast in the open fermenters.
And you've got a window on your room where the open fermenters are. And there's a sign on the door that says "Do not enter." Are you being? How cautious do you have to be when you have open fermenters?
I think that it definitely depends on the timing. Once the beer gets fermenting, it's relatively stable, and but there's that very crucial period. I mean, like right when you pitch the wort in there, and the beer hasn't started fermenting yet, the pH hasn't had a chance to drop. I think that's a really critical time, and we're really careful when we go in there. We just try to avoid going in there, period. And there's simple things you can do to just keep it clean in there. I mean, we keep it as clean as we can, but when we're in there, we're not kind of jabbing away, opening our mouths a lot. I mean, we try to, we don't go in there right after we mill malt, that sort of thing. I mean, just small things that are sort of maybe obvious or small, but they're not that much of an inconvenience. I mean, you get used to them for sure.
And how is the room set up mechanically?
The room is it's under positive pressure, so that the air is constantly blowing out, and the air that's going into the room we send through just a really simple air filter, and it also has a UV light in the ductwork, so that a lot of the microbes are getting sort of zapped on their way in. And I wouldn't consider that necessary by any means, but it was a pretty easy thing to set up, and it gives us extra peace of mind. So.
And you would think that once a room got infected, it would be harder to disinfect it than to keep it from getting infected in the first place. Yeah,
it's nice to just start off clean. And then another key thing to the open fermenters too that is really important to point out is that if you have healthy yeast and your fermentations go kind of as they should, I suppose, with a short lag phase and that sort of thing, you really reduce the risk of anything haywire going on. I mean, and that's true for any style of fermenter, really. So I think as brewers, we should always be, really keen on making sure that the yeast is where you want it. I think that the most important thing in the process, not just for us, but probably for everyone, is like just having a healthy fermentation. I think that can sometimes get sort of overlooked in a lot of ways.
So how do you pitch your yeast? Do you use fresh yeast all the time, or do you reuse the yeast, or how do you work that?
We reuse the yeast. We just pull it off from every batch. I mean, we don't do too many high gravity beers here, so yeast is usually in pretty good shape, and we're still not too far into it. I mean, we've got new yeast a couple times, so we've never taken it past 10 generations yet. So,
and you just started brewing in March, so
yeah, correct.
So the shine hasn't worn off of any of this stuff yet. So talk about to get these, we're geeky homebrewers out there. Talk about what's important to get the best beers out of these styles or using this yeast.
Definitely getting to know the yeast is important. I mean, if you're doing farmhouse style beers or saisons or even just Belgian beers, there's so many different strains available. and everybody's got different tastes. So I'd say definitely try to experiment with as many strains as you can. If you can swing it, maybe do a lot of split batches. You can learn a lot from splitting batches with different yeasts. And find yeasts that you like, and then try those yeasts in different ways, as in different, using different fermentation temperatures, maybe mashing in differently, and different amounts of like oxygen. I think different pitch rates. Some yeast can stand to be more over or under pitched. For home, I know a lot of home brewers don't like to make yeast starters. And I really advise against that. I think if there's any advice I want to give to a home brewer, it's going to be always make a yeast starter. That's just a huge key to a good beer. I think you can make a good beer sometimes without a yeast starter, but you're pretty much guaranteed to not have to worry about it if you do make one. So, and it's a really small step that you can finagle pretty easily. I think it takes like 15 minutes.
Go down your list of beers. Your all-around beers, and then we're drinking some beers right now. Maybe we ought to talk about them too. But what's your standard list? The 4 year-round beers that we produce are named after the starting gravity in Belgian brewing degrees. So they are 4, 5, 6, and 7. The 4, which starts at a gravity of 1040, is essentially just a very simple wheat beer. We think it really showcases the yeast and the ingredients really well. All the barley in that beer is from Southern Oregon and malted here in Vancouver, and the wheat is grown in Washington and the same malted here in Vancouver. So we feel it's a really beautiful, simple recipe. It gets one addition of Holler Tower hops, the Mount Angel grown Holler Towers. And so we really feel like it's a kind of nice way to get to know the yeast. That's another thing too, for people like kind of curious about getting to know their yeast. Doing simple recipes, I think, is another way to do that too. So that's the 4. The 5 is basically like a pale ale recipe, again, where we use the French yeast. So I feel like it's way more dry than a typical pale ale, and it probably pulls out a little bit more spicy notes too than what I'd say like a typical English or American strain of yeast might do. So it's a pretty neat beer. It's another really food-friendly one for sure. The 6 is a dark rye beer. We use quite a bit of caramel malts in that one, and that beer's a lot of fun. It's another one where we get to know our yeast, and after using our yeast homebrewing a lot before we even opened the place, it kind of dawned on me that it might do really well in a rye beer. I'd never made a rye beer before in my life, but I had started drinking a lot. They're getting a lot more popular now, and some of them are really turning me on. I mean, there's some really good ones out there now, so we thought we'd kind of give it a shot. So when we opened up the brewery, we said let's try it out, and so we did it up for the first time, and it really turned out pretty well. We thought we liked what the yeast did in that rye beer, because we had a lot of sort of darker flavors coming from the malts, and then the yeast is making a lot of sort of like pale, I think, stone fruit type of flavors in that beer. So we have like a really nice contrast, and then the spice from the rye, I think we get some really cool complexities in that beer, where some of our other beers are kind of a lot more straightforward and simple. And then the 7 is one that we like to call. It's one that we like to call the sort of the Northwest style saison. It's usually at least 8% or more, and that beer is a really simple recipe. It's nothing but pale malt and a little Munich, but we use a pretty good grip of hops in it too, hence the Northwest part of it. So it's got a really nice aromatic quality, where in that one our yeast is producing a lot of citric flavors, and the hops that we use are also pulling a lot of citrus out too, I think, a lot of spice and citrus. So it's like this very aromatic beer. You talked about recipes being simple. That's advantageous to you being, especially a small startup brewery, because you don't have to warehouse a ton of different ingredients. But in your opinion, can recipes get too overcomplex by adding too much of a little bit of this and a little bit of that?
If they taste good, no.
Good answer.
But I mean, I think you should always probably strive to keep it as simple as you can. I mean, if you're hitting the flavor profile that you want, there's no reason to make it more complicated.
I think that's good advice. Now, the first beer that I tried was a Gruit. And this is one of those beers that I've always wanted to try to brew myself. Talk about that beer. And that was your first attempt, right?
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Gruit was one that was definitely inspired by the Roots Brewing Company, Gruit Kolsch. I've been drinking that beer for several years now. Actually, when Craig used to work at Port Holling out in Gresham, he used to produce that beer too out there, and I've been drinking it since then. I love that beer, and so I think it's nice to be able to draw inspiration from local brewers. You know, a lot of people talk about like, oh yeah, we were inspired by this beer in Belgium or this and that. It's like we're getting inspired down the street, which is another cool thing about being in Portland. But so the Gruit that we made, we wanted to use some different ingredients from what they were using. Theirs takes lavender, chamomile, mugwort, and grains of paradise, I believe. We ended up using lemongrass, bitter orange peel, Szechuan peppercorns, and hyssop. And it was one of those things where you got to start somewhere, so we went to the herb shop here in town where they got 600 jars of all sorts of stuff. And my other brewer, Garrett, and I just stuck our noses in a lot of jars and kind of pieced together the blend there at the herb shop of what aromatics we wanted to use, what herbs and spices we wanted to use. So that's how we came up with that. And we were looking for some sort of balance. You know, you want bright notes, you want darker notes, you want some bitterness, you might want some sweeter notes. So there's lots of ways to play with it. And then we brewed that beer for the Organic Beer Fest, and we wanted to kind of mix it up some more. I never used spelt in a beer, so we used a little bit of spelt, which was kind of fun. And we kept it really light. We wanted to make a really dry beer. I think when you're pulling the hops out of a beer, you're not going to have much bitterness in there. I mean, we used a hyssop for a lot of bittering qualities, but it still didn't provide the same kind of bitterness we would get from a nice load of hops. So,
yeah, I was going to ask, what is hyssop?
Hyssop's just a medicinal herb. I think the name means holy herb in Greek or Hebrew. And we actually liked it so much that we're going to use it in our winter beer in a more pronounced way.
Huh. And what kind of character does it give you?
I think it gives a nice, definitely a distinct bitterness to it. It's different from a hop bitterness. It's kind of hard to describe, but it has kind of like a minty, just almost generally herbaceous quality too. Very green. It's really aromatic. I mean, it's kind of hard to describe. I'd say it's kind of like a cooler flavor though.
And I got a bit of tang to the. You know, there's almost a sourness to the beer as well.
Yeah, I'm not sure where the sourness came from, to be honest. It was just, I'm assuming it had to have come from one of the herbs or spices, because we did everything else like normal on that beer, and we haven't been able to pinpoint where exactly the sourness came from.
A little happy accident there. I mean, it's very nice. And you also do a beer with a sour mash.
Yeah, the 4, which is our wheat beer, we do a sour mash on. Part of that is because we didn't want to add too many sort of brewing salts to that beer. As far as to affect the flavor very much, we wanted to keep it pretty clean. But our water here in Portland doesn't really have too much going on. So to get kind of the mash pH we were looking for, we decided to give the sour mash a shot. And in addition to sort of correcting our mash pH, we feel like we do get some really nice aromatic qualities from it too. It's not just about the acidity; it's about some aromatic compounds without a doubt.
And your technique is extremely complicated to getting the sour mash.
Yeah, it's pretty much taking 10% of the grist, throwing it into a rectangular cooler the night before. So it usually sits for about 18 hours before we actually put it into the main mash the next day. And we use the hottest water we can get out of the hose. So it usually lands, we take a temperature on it in the morning, and it's usually around 110, give or take a few degrees. The pH is usually around 3.5 or 3.6. It's pretty low, and it's very ripe. It's got some pretty amazing aromas coming off of it.
Would a a non-beer connoisseur find those aromas appealing?
Absolutely not. Yeah, I mean, it's when we open up the cooler to take the temp, first thing in the morning on that brew day, and it fills the entire brewery with the smell. You'd be surprised. It's pretty amazing. I definitely recommend it. It's a lot of fun, and you might be freaked out the first time that you do it, thinking that it's going to totally ruin the beer because it's so intense and so pungent. But I mean, it really mellows out, and it only adds, I think, just a little background note in the finished beer by the time it's all processed. So.
Well, did it scare you the first time or had you seen a sour mash done before?
I'd done some sour mashes in the past on a oat stout recipe while I was working at BJ's to kind of give it a little bit of an extra twang as well.
So it wasn't unexpected that these aromas came wafting out of the cooler.
Yeah, correct.
Talk about this beer. What have I got here?
That's the Pinot Barrel 4. It was our second batch of beer. It was basically the sort of the pilot brew for the 4. But we decided to send it in some of these old Pinot Noir barrels that we got from a friend. And we added, in the barrel, we added some lactobacillus, some Brettanomyces clauseni, which is kind of a less popular strain of Brettanomyces, which I find kind of odd because I think it's delicious. I like that strain a lot, and some cherry puree that we got from here in Oregon.
And it's delicious. It's not compared to other beers that are out there. It's not very funky.
Yeah.
Is it going to get more funky over time, or is this the funk level that you are shooting for?
I'd say that this beer at this point is still really young. I mean, we just brewed it the third week in March, I think. So it's still very young. I think the Brettanomyces is just starting to sort of show its head. And but this strain of Brettanomyces isn't too funky. So I think it'll produce a little bit of earthy character, but not what most people associate with Brettanomyces. So it'll be a more controlled type of beer. And same with the acidity, too. This beer was never intended to be like painfully sour or anything like that, and we kind of like it like that. And the fruit too, I mean, we're really keen on doing balanced beers here, and the fruit was something that we did just 1 pound of puree per gallon, and which isn't really that much, so we just kind of wanted a hint in there. We didn't want to make a beer that was like, say, like some of the fruit lambics from Belgium where they're really tasty, but I mean where the fruit is like by far the dominant flavor, I think, in a lot of those beers.
Is it scary being down in the basement with the sour bugs and with your open fermenter in the other room? Are you playing with fire here, or you feel comfortable?
Yeah, we feel totally comfortable with it. I mean, like I said, we're pretty confident in our fermentations and our yeast, and we keep track of things too. We pour plates in the beers to make sure there's nothing weird in there that shouldn't be in there, and we taste the beers every day like every brewer does. So we'd know if something came up. So we feel like we're on top of it.
So where is the future for Upright Brewing? I mean, are you happy with being, the size that you are, or I mean, we're in a basement and there's not a whole lot of room to expand down here. It's a beautiful facility, but you're not going to become New Belgium overnight.
No.
What are your goals?
We'd like to kind of keep doing what we're doing. We got room for maybe a few more fermenters, so we can make a little bit more beer. But we'll never be making anywhere over 2,000 barrels a year in here. Probably not even really that close. And so we'll always be a pretty small brewery. And we'd like to just keep focusing on making the 4 year-round beers as good as we can. We're still tinkering with them a little bit. And so we want to make those beers really spot on, really consistent. And then we also want to have a lot of fun with our seasonal and one-off beers. And we have a blast making these beers. I mean, like I said, we've only been brewing for I've only been brewing for really just not much more than 3 or 4 years. And my partner Garrett, he's pretty new to it too, so a lot of the stuff is pretty fresh for us. And so it's a real blast. We're having a lot of fun kind of going through some of this stuff for the first time.
What advice can you give somebody who's wanting to start a small brewery?
Definitely get as much commercial experience as you can, even if it's just 6 months. If you've never worked in a commercial brewery, definitely do it before you commit, financially and all the time and effort into opening up your own brewery. And besides that, talk to all the other brewers. I mean, if you live in a community where there's a lot of other brewers, talk to them, and if not, just talk to other brewers around the country and pick people's brains for sure, because you can learn a lot from other people, and that's kind of the easy way to do it in a way, I think. So.
Well, I like your approach. I like the fact that you, Dogfish says off-centered beers for off-centered people. These are kind of, different beers that I don't see you doing just a standard pale ale or a standard porter, or something in the lineup just to keep the beer going out the door. I think you're really fortunate to live in this part of the country where you can carve a niche, and just establish yourself on a very kind of, I don't know if boutique is a good word or not, but very focused.
It's very specific. Yeah. I mean, Portland's phenomenal for that, and if you can do that where you're at, I think that's great. I mean, we have a guy here in McMinnville, which is not too far away, who's doing all German-style lager beer. I think a lot of people thought that would never really fly out here because everything's so entrenched with pales and IPAs and this and that, and he seems to be doing good. He's making really good beer, and that doesn't hurt, but but I think we're going to start seeing a lot more of that. I think we're going to see people who are wanting to open small operations where you can kind of get by doing really specific boutique type stuff, I suppose. And I think sort of maybe following in the footsteps of a lot of the wine movement out here.
Well, not every restaurant has to become McDonald's or Burger King to be successful. So maybe not every brewery has to become a nationally distributed brewery to be what the brewer intends it to be.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think a lot of people confuse any business with having this sort of desire to expand constantly and become a big business. And people come in here and I think they can be sometimes sort of surprised that we sort of have a pretty relaxed attitude about things, and I don't feel like we shove our brands down people's throats and stuff. And some people feel like no matter what your business is, you've got to be shoving it down people's throats, and that we don't think that's true. So we didn't open up a small brewery to deal in the marketing and that sort of things.
Well, that's refreshing, and I appreciate your time. You guys have any questions? Last chance.
No, the beer's awesome. I had the rye just now, and it was the number 6, and it was fabulous.
Cool.
It's
Thanks.
yeah, that's one of those things that you get to try now a lot. Is it used to be wheat beers. Everybody was doing wheat beer. Everybody's doing some Belgian white beer. And now you see a lot of people trying using rye, but a lot of times it's a little bit much. This was a beautiful balance, really crisp and nice. I liked it a lot.
Yeah, that one was just about 15% rye. I think 10 or 11% malted, and maybe a 4 or 5% rolled or flaked, whatever you want to call them.
Awesome. Well, Charles, thanks for turning us on to Upright Brewing and to Alex.
Sure, I knew that you'd enjoy it and your listeners would enjoy it. It's a good time down here. I'm down here pretty much every Sunday at the tasting room.
Awesome. Well, my glass is empty, so it's time to go take care of that. Thanks, Alex.
Thank you.
Well, thanks again to Alex. Thanks to Charles for opening our eyes to Upright. And thanks to Andy for just being Andy. If you have brewing questions, show suggestions, or just want to say howdy, write to james@basicbrewing.com or just fill out the contact form on basicbrewing.com. And please don't forget to tell us where you're from. You can check out our homebrewing DVDs, Introduction to Extract Homebrewing, Stepping into All Grain, Low-Tech Lagering and Decoction Mashing, and Introduction to Wine Kits. We've got combo deals on our site to save you a few bucks if you want to buy more than one DVD at a time. And you can see a listing of the fine folks across the country who sell our DVDs on basicbrewing.com. And if there isn't a vendor in your area, you can order them online in our online shop at basicbrewingshop.com. We've got shirts of different colors. Maybe by next week we'll have a new one. Making progress. And thanks to everybody who's continued to click on our Amazon.com link. We appreciate the support there. Our featured products this week that were purchased through the link are 3-piece Pocahontas Indian Sexy Holiday Party Costume.
Ooh, it's time for a sexy party.
And it's my best Stewie. JVC Everlow GZ HD 300 60 gigabyte high definition camcorder, red. It doesn't say whether those are connected.
Time for a sexy party.
I'll have to work on that. Not as good as Brokaw, but
thanks again, everyone, and remember, I can't tell who but what, so no worries. Just click on the Amazon.com logo on our site the next time you feel like Amazon shopping. We appreciate your support.
Stewie, trying to be.
Ooh, we'll just let you be nude.
All right. And don't... Enough of that. Hoy. And don't forget that you can also join the American Homebrewers Association
through an associate link on basicbrewing.com.
And along with that, there's the BYO ad, too, as well. And you'll get great information from both of those. And you'll be helping us as well when you click on those and join and subscribe. That's all until next week. Until then, thanks for listening. I'm James Spencer. Production help for Basic Brewing Radio and our website is provided by Kelly Dodson. Basic Brewing Radio
is a production of Active Voicing.
We'll talk to you next time, everybody.
So long.